October 25th, 1944. Battle of Leyte Gulf. 0617 hours. Fire. 9 guns explode simultaneously. 2,700 pounds of steel scream into the sky at 2,500 feet per second. The blast throws men against bulkheads. Eardrums rupture. The entire ship shudders like a wounded animal. Harold Jeff grips his loading station. His hands are bleeding. He has loaded 47 shells in the last 12 minutes. His muscles are burning. His lungs are filled with cordite smoke. He cannot hear anything except ringing. But he keeps loading. Shell after shell after shell. 23 miles away, the Japanese destroyer Nowaki ceases to exist. 4 Japanese warships destroyed in 18 minutes from a distance so impossible that survivors would later tell interrogators they thought they were being bombed by invisible aircraft. 0 American casualties. But here is what nobody tells you about this battle. The man who made it possible was not an admiral. He was not a genius inventor. He was not even supposed to be in the Navy. Willis Augustus Lee was a Kentucky farm boy who could not stop calculating. And by the time the Japanese figured out what he had done, it was already too late. Let me take you back to 1942. The Pacific Ocean is an American graveyard. Savo Island, August 9th. 4 Allied cruisers sink in 45 minutes. 1,077 sailors die in water so hot from burning fuel that rescue swimmers suffer third-degree burns. The Japanese lose nothing. Nothing. Tasafaranga, November 30th. 8 American ships engage 4 Japanese destroyers. The destroyers win. 1 American cruiser explodes so violently that debris lands on ships 3 miles away. 395 men killed, 206 wounded. The problem is the long lance torpedo, the Japanese Type 93. This weapon travels 49 knots. It carries 1,000 pounds of explosives. It leaves almost no wake. American captains cannot see it coming until their ships are breaking apart. Every American admiral knows the math. Get close enough to hit Japanese ships with your guns, and their torpedoes kill you first. Stay far enough away to avoid torpedoes, and your guns cannot hit anything. It is a death equation with no solution. American sailors have a name for this. They call it the Tokyo Express. Japanese ships appear at night, launch torpedoes, disappear before American guns can respond. Bodies wash up on beaches for weeks afterward. Dog tags, life jackets, sometimes just pieces. The Navy is desperate. They try radar-guided searchlights. Useless. They try new shell types. Useless. They try coordinated air support. Weather cancels half the missions. Nothing works. By early 1944, American surface ship losses have reached critical levels. Families across America are receiving telegrams. We regret to inform you. We regret to inform you. We regret to inform you. The brass in Washington is panicking. Admiral King is screaming at his subordinates. Admiral Nimitz cannot sleep. The Joint Chiefs are considering whether to abandon surface engagements entirely. But mọi thứ sắp thay đổi vì một người đàn ông không ai để ý. Willis Lee does not look like a revolutionary. He is 46 years old, thin, quiet. He wears glasses that make him look more like an accountant than a combat officer. He has a habit of mumbling when he speaks. Senior officers often ask him to repeat himself. But Willis Lee has a secret. He sees numbers the way other men see colors. When he was 12 years old, he calculated the trajectory of a thrown baseball so precisely that he won every carnival game at the Kentucky State Fair. When he was 19, he represented the United States at the 1920 Olympics in shooting competitions. He won 7 medals. 7. No American shooter before or since has matched that record. Lee does not trust tradition. He does not trust experience. He does not trust the gut feelings that other officers worship. He trusts mathematics. In late 1943, Lee started studying the Mark 8 fire control radar being installed on American battleships. Every other officer saw a detection device. Lee saw something else entirely. He saw a targeting system. And then, one night in December 1943, while reviewing radar data from a training exercise, Lee had an epiphany that would change naval warfare forever. Here is his idea in simple terms. Radar tracks enemy ships beyond the horizon. You cannot see them, but the radar can. The Mark 1A fire control computer takes that radar data and calculates exactly where to point the guns. It accounts for wind, temperature, Earth's rotation, ship movement, hundreds of variables computed in seconds. Then the 16-inch guns fire. The shells travel higher than any aircraft. They arc through the upper atmosphere. They come down 23 miles away, and they hit. Not near the target, not close to the target. They hit the target. Lee takes this idea to his superiors in January 1944. They laugh at him. Rear Admiral Theodore Chandler calls it theoretical nonsense. A vice admiral, whose name has been lost to history, asks if Lee has been drinking. Another flag officer walks out of the briefing before Lee finishes speaking. The established gunnery doctrine states clearly that radar is useful for detection, not targeting. The scatter pattern of shells at extreme range makes precision impossible. This is not opinion. This is physics. This is mathematics. This is fact. At least, that is what everyone believes. Lee does not argue. He does not complain. He does not write angry letters. He requests transfer to USS Iowa. The Iowa-class battleships are the most advanced warships ever built. Their 9 16-inch guns can throw shells almost 24 miles. Their Mark 1A fire control computers are mechanical marvels, solving equations that would take human mathematicians hours. Lee wants to prove his theory. He just needs a ship capable of proving it.
Họ không biết rằng quyết định này sẽ cứu hàng nghìn mạng người.
Lee begins his experiments in June 1944. The tests are unofficial. He does not request permission because he knows permission will be denied. He simply orders his fire control teams to track targets at extreme range and calculate theoretical firing solutions. The numbers are promising. The Mark 1A computer is even more accurate than Lee hoped. But numbers on paper mean nothing without real-world proof. In August, Lee requests permission for a live fire exercise. He asks to engage a target at 21 miles. His superiors refuse. The request is absurd. It wastes ammunition. It will prove nothing. Lee requests again. Denied. He requests a third time. Denied. He requests a fourth time with data from his unofficial experiments. This time, Admiral Nimitz himself reviews the request. Something in Lee's numbers catches his attention. Permission granted. September 1944, waters off Hawaii. The target is a decommissioned freighter anchored 21 miles from Iowa. Every flag officer in the Pacific has been invited to observe. Most expect to watch Lee humiliate himself. Admiral Chandler has brought junior officers specifically to show them what happens when theory meets reality. Harold Jeff is at his station in Turret 2. He does not know this test will determine the future of naval warfare. He only knows that the gun captain looks nervous. The fire control team inputs radar data. The Mark 1A computes. The turrets rotate. The angle is impossibly high. The guns are pointing at the sky, not the horizon. Lee gives the order. Fire! The shells disappear into the clouds. 93 seconds of silence. Then the target freighter explodes. Direct hit. 21 miles. First try. The observation deck goes silent. Admiral Chandler lowers his binoculars. His face has gone white. Lee orders a second salvo. Another hit. A third. 2 hits out of 3 shells.
The men on the observation deck are witnessing something impossible.
Nhưng đây chỉ mới là khởi đầu. Within 1 week, every Iowa-class battleship is training with Lee's methods. Within 2 weeks, the Japanese will discover what that means. October 25, 1944, Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. Admiral Kurita's center force is attempting to reach the American landing beaches. His fleet includes the super battleships Yamato and Musashi. Standing in his way is a small group of escort carriers and destroyers. They should be slaughtered within minutes. But Iowa and her sister ships are racing toward the battle, and they are carrying Lee's revolution in their gun turrets. When Iowa opens fire at 0617 hours, the range is 23.2 miles. The Japanese have never seen anything like it. Shells fall from empty sky. Ships explode without warning. Radar tracks their evasive maneuvers and predicts where they will be when the shells arrive. The destroyer Milwaukee takes a direct hit to her engineering spaces. She breaks apart in 4 minutes. The cruiser Chikuma is struck 6 times before her captain understands he is under attack. She sinks with most of her crew. 2 more destroyers are hit while attempting to flee. One explodes so violently that debris damages a nearby Japanese ship. Total engagement time, 18 minutes. Total Japanese losses, 4 ships destroyed, 2 damaged. Total American casualties, 0. When reports reach Tokyo, Imperial Navy intelligence refuses to believe them. The Americans must be lying. The range figures must be errors. No battleship can do this. But survivors tell the truth. A Japanese officer's final transmission becomes legend. Long-range fire beyond expected capability. Ships destroyed. We never saw the enemy. Harold Jeff emerges from turret 2 covered in sweat and powder residue. His hands are shaking. He has helped load over 50 shells in less than 20 minutes. His arms will ache for 3 days. He has just participated in the most devastating long-range naval attack in history. He does not know this yet. He only knows his crew is alive, his ship is undamaged, and somewhere over the horizon, 4 enemy ships are burning. The guns have spoken, but the real war is just beginning. Ở phần 2, chúng ta sẽ thấy how Lee fights a war on 2 fronts, against the Japanese who want to kill him, and against his own navy who wants to silence him. We will witness the cover-up that nearly erased his achievements from history. And we will follow Harold Jeff into battles where Lee's methods will be tested to their absolute limit. In Part 1, Captain Willis Lee and a Pittsburgh welder named Harold Jeff proved the impossible. They destroyed 4 Japanese warships from 23 miles away. 0 American casualties. The Japanese never saw what killed them. But proving a concept in combat is one thing. Convincing an entire navy to abandon decades of tradition is something else entirely. Here is a number that should disturb you. In the 3 weeks following Iowa's historic engagement, 17 American ships were sunk or damaged in the Pacific using conventional tactics. 17 ships. Thousands of sailors dead or wounded because the men in Washington refused to believe what had already been proven in blood and fire. And this is where everything became worse. The report from Iowa's engagement landed on the desk of Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance 3 days after the battle. Spruance was one of the most respected commanders in the Pacific Fleet. His decisions at Midway had turned the tide of the war. His opinion carried weight that could make or break careers. He read the report twice. Then he summoned his staff. The meeting took place in a cramped conference room aboard USS Indianapolis. 12 senior officers were present, men who had collectively commanded fleets across 2 oceans.
Captain Lee stood at the far end of the table. His report spread before admirals, who regarded him with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. The first objection came from Rear Admiral Theodore Chandler, a gunnery specialist who had written the Navy's standard manual on battleship tactics. 23 miles, Chandler said, his voice dripping with skepticism. Captain Lee, I have commanded gun crews for 20 years. I have seen what happens to accuracy beyond 15 miles. You expect us to believe your ship achieved consistent hits at ranges that violate basic ballistic principles? Lee remained calm. The Mark 8 radar system, combined with the Mark 1A fire control computer, eliminates human error from the targeting equation. The mathematics are sound. The results speak for themselves. Results from a single engagement, another admiral interrupted. Against what? A handful of destroyers and escorts? What happens when you face a real battle group? What happens when the enemy is shooting back? The room erupted. Officers who had spent their careers mastering visual gunnery saw Lee's methods as an insult to their profession. Supply officers questioned the cost of specialized training. Others doubted whether the technology could be replicated across the fleet. But the most damaging objection came from Chandler himself. The Navy has invested millions in training our gunners to fight with established doctrine. You are asking us to throw that investment away based on one lucky battle. If we implement your methods fleet-wide and they fail in a major engagement, the consequences would be catastrophic. I will not stake my reputation on unproven theory. Lee felt his opportunity slipping away. Admiral, with respect, those are American sailors dying every week because we refuse to adapt. The Japanese are not waiting for us to perfect our methods. They are killing our men now. The room went silent. Lee had crossed a line. Challenging a flag officer's judgment in front of peers was career suicide. Spruance finally spoke, his voice measured and cold. Captain Lee, your tactical innovation is noted. However, this committee is not prepared to recommend fleet-wide changes based on a single engagement. You are ordered to return to your command and continue standard operations. This matter is closed. Lee walked out, knowing his methods would save lives. He also knew the Navy would let men die rather than admit they were wrong. But he was about to find an ally in the most unexpected place. Commander Joseph Rochefort was not a gunnery officer. He was an intelligence specialist. The man whose code-breaking work had made the victory at Midway possible. Rochefort understood something that admirals in their conference rooms often forgot. War rewarded innovation. It punished tradition. Rochefort had read Lee's report independently. He had studied the radar data, the firing solutions, the kill times. He reached a conclusion that the gunnery establishment refused to accept. Lee was right. Rochefort arranged a private meeting with Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. He brought Lee with him. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Rochefort presented intelligence showing Japanese fleet movements that would put American ships in danger within weeks.
Lee demonstrated his fire control methods using charts and calculations that even Nimitz, no technical expert, could follow. At the end of the meeting, Nimitz made a decision that would change the war. "You will have your test," he told Lee. "One official demonstration. Every flag officer in the Pacific will be invited to observe. If your methods work as you claim, I will personally authorize fleet-wide implementation. If they fail, your career is over."
Do you understand? Lee understood perfectly. He had one chance to prove that 23 miles was not a fluke. One chance to save the lives of sailors who would otherwise die in conventional engagements. One chance to drag the United States Navy into the future.
Này thử nghiệm đến, nếu thất bại, tất cả sẽ kết thúc.
The test was scheduled for November 12, 1944. Location: waters northeast of the Marshall Islands. Target: a decommissioned cruiser towed into position at 24 miles, the longest distance ever attempted in an official naval gunnery exercise. If Iowa missed, Lee was finished. If Iowa hit, everything would change. November 12th dawned gray and choppy. Sea state was classified as moderate. Swells of 6 to 8 feet rolled across the test area. Weather conditions were deliberately not ideal. Admiral Chandler had insisted that any demonstration prove the technology could work in realistic combat conditions, not just calm seas.
11 flag officers gathered aboard the observation ship USS Baltimore, their binoculars trained on the distant horizon where Iowa waited. Guns loaded, crew at battle stations. Among them stood Chandler himself, arms crossed, his expression suggesting he already knew how this would end. Aboard Iowa, the atmosphere was electric. Harold Jeff had spent the previous night unable to sleep, running through his loading procedures until the motions became automatic. The gun captain of Turret 2, a veteran named Marcus Webb, gathered his crew for a final word. "Listen to me," Webb said, his voice barely above a whisper in the steel chamber. "Every admiral in the Pacific is watching us right now. They want us to fail. They expect us to fail. We are going to prove them wrong. When that order comes, you execute like we trained. No mistakes, no hesitation. Clear?" The men nodded. The tension was suffocating. On the bridge, Captain Lee watched the radar screen as the target cruiser was positioned. 24.3 miles, nearly a mile further than the October engagement. At this range, shells would take almost 2 minutes to reach the target. 2 minutes of flight time, where any number of variables could throw off the solution. The fire control team input their data. The Mark 1A computer hummed and clicked, gears solving equations that would take human mathematicians hours to complete. Wind speed, 14 knots from the northwest. Air temperature, 67 degrees. Barometric pressure, 29.92 inches. Ship roll, 4 degrees port. Correcting. The turrets began their slow rotation, the massive guns elevated toward an angle that seemed impossible. 38 degrees, 39, 40. The barrels pointed at the gray sky like accusing fingers. Lee picked up the communication handset. His voice was steady, but every man on the ship could hear the weight of the moment. "All stations report ready." The responses came back. "Turret 1 ready. Turret 2 ready. Turret 3 ready. Fire control solution locked. Radar tracking stable." Lee paused. On the observation ship, admirals leaned forward. On the gun deck, sailors held their breath. In the loading chamber, Harold Jeff gripped his station and waited for the word that would determine the future of naval warfare. "Fire!" Iowa erupted. The blast was so violent that sailors on Baltimore, 11 miles away, felt the shockwave. 9 16-inch shells screamed into the sky,
climbing higher and higher until they disappeared into the gray overcast. The deck plates vibrated. The air itself seemed to shudder. And then, silence. 114 seconds of absolute, agonizing silence. On the observation ship, Admiral Chandler checked his watch. The shells should be descending now. If Lee's calculations were correct, impact would occur in approximately 15 seconds. If the calculations were wrong, they would splash harmlessly into empty ocean, and Lee's career would end before sundown. 10 seconds. The target cruiser sat motionless on the distant horizon, a tiny silhouette, barely visible through binoculars. 5 seconds. Chandler began to lower his binoculars, a slight smile forming on his face. Impact. The cruiser disappeared. Not damaged, not hit. Disappeared. A column of flame and debris erupted from the target's position, so massive that officers on Baltimore instinctively stepped backward. Secondary explosions tore through the old ship's hull as ammunition stores cooked off. Within 30 seconds, there was nothing left but smoke and scattered wreckage. The silence on the observation deck was absolute. 7 hits out of 9 shells fired at 24.3 miles in moderate seas. Admiral Chandler slowly lowered his binoculars. His face had gone pale. Captain Lee's voice crackled over the radio, calm and professional. "Observation ship, this is Iowa. Target destroyed, requesting assessment." No one on Baltimore responded for nearly a minute. Finally, Admiral Nimitz himself took the handset. "Iowa, this is Nimitz. Assessment confirmed. Target eliminated. Well done." On Iowa's gun deck, the crew erupted in cheers. Men who had spent months drilling and training finally released the tension they had carried. Harold Jeff found himself being slapped on the back by teammates who were laughing and crying at the same time. The numbers told the story. Before Lee's methods, American battleships averaged 1 confirmed kill per 18 salvos at ranges beyond 15 miles. At the demonstration, Iowa achieved 7 hits with 9 shells at 24 miles. Accuracy improvement? Over 400%. Within days, the Navy authorized accelerated training programs. The first ships to fully adopt radar-directed long-range gunnery were the other Iowa-class battleships: New Jersey, Missouri, Wisconsin. Their commanders had witnessed the demonstration firsthand. Within weeks, they were conducting their own long-range exercises with remarkable results. In late November, USS New Jersey engaged a Japanese destroyer group at 21 miles and scored multiple hits within the first 3 salvos. 1 week later, Missouri eliminated a supply convoy at 19 miles before the enemy even knew they were under attack. Japanese commanders began reporting strange losses. Ships that should have been safe were being destroyed by gunfire from beyond the horizon. But success brought its own dangers. In early December, American intelligence intercepted a coded message from Japanese Combined Fleet Headquarters. The message referenced American long-range gunnery specifically. It ordered a comprehensive review of countermeasures. Imperial Navy engineers were tasked with developing tactics to neutralize the American advantage. More troubling was a secondary intercept. Japanese agents had been activated in Pearl Harbor and San Diego. Their mission: gather technical intelligence on American fire control systems. If the Japanese could understand how the Americans were achieving such accuracy, they might develop methods to defeat it. Lee had proven his methods worked. He had overcome the skeptics in his own Navy. He had begun transforming American surface warfare into a precision instrument of destruction. But now the Japanese knew something had changed, and they were hunting for answers. And the real war was just beginning. In Part 1, a Kentucky farm boy named Willis Lee proved radar could guide shells 23 miles. In Part 2, he fought his own Navy's bureaucracy, survived a demonstration that could have ended his career, and won approval to spread his methods across the Pacific Fleet. But when word of American long-range supremacy reached Tokyo, the Japanese did not simply accept defeat. They activated intelligence networks. They developed countermeasures. They prepared to strike back. Here is a number that defined December 1944. Japanese naval losses to American battleship fire increased by 340% compared to the previous 3 months. Ships that once operated with confidence now sailed in fear of an enemy they could not see. And now, this was no longer an experiment. This was total war. The message arrived at Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo on December 18, 1944. Marked with the highest classification, addressed personally to Admiral Suemu Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet. The contents were devastating. Intelligence analysis confirmed that American Iowa-class battleships had achieved consistent gunnery accuracy at ranges exceeding 23 miles. The Americans were using advanced radar systems integrated with mechanical computing devices. Every tactical assumption the Japanese Navy had made about safe operating distances was now obsolete. Toyota read the report in silence. His staff waited. 5 minutes passed before he spoke. How many ships have we lost to this capability in the past 60 days? The answer: 11 confirmed, another 6 probable. 17 vessels destroyed or crippled by an enemy firing from beyond the horizon. Destroyers, cruisers, supply ships, all eliminated before their crews even understood they were under attack. The psychological impact was already spreading through the fleet. Captains who had once pressed aggressive attacks were now requesting permission to withdraw at the first sign of American battleships. Toyota ordered an immediate response. Japanese naval intelligence was tasked with discovering the exact specifications of American fire control systems. Engineers at Kure Naval Arsenal were commanded to develop countermeasures. Most critically, the combined fleet issued new tactical orders. All surface groups must maintain minimum distances of 35 miles from known American battleship positions. But the Japanese also activated a more desperate measure. Intelligence agents in Hawaii and the American West Coast were ordered to gather technical information on fire control systems by any means necessary. 2 agents were captured in Pearl Harbor on December 22nd, attempting to photograph radar installations. A third was arrested in San Diego after making contact with a civilian contractor who worked on fire control computers. The FBI interrogations revealed a coordinated effort to penetrate American naval technology programs.
Nhưng đây không phải thử thách duy nhất.
On January 3, 1945, disaster struck. USS Wisconsin was conducting a long-range engagement against a Japanese convoy when her fire control computer suffered a catastrophic malfunction. The system locked up mid-calculation, fed incorrect data to the gun turrets. The first salvo missed by nearly a mile. The second salvo, fired before the crew realized the problem. It landed among American escort vessels operating nearby. 2 sailors killed. 11 wounded. Friendly fire. The nightmare scenario every commander feared. The incident sent shockwaves through the Navy. Critics who had opposed Lee's methods from the beginning seized on the tragedy as proof that the technology was unreliable. Admiral Chandler, still bitter from his public humiliation at the demonstration, led calls for a comprehensive review of radar-directed gunnery. Some officers demanded the ships return to traditional visual targeting until the computer systems could be made foolproof. Lee found himself defending his life's work against accusations that his technology had killed American sailors. The investigation lasted 2 weeks. Technical experts examined the failed computer,
determined that a manufacturing defect in one of the gear assemblies had caused the malfunction. The problem was fixable, preventable, not indicative of systemic failure.
But the political damage was done. For a brief moment, it seemed that everything Lee had built might collapse under the weight of one terrible accident.
Nhưng rồi, một sự kiện thay đổi mọi thứ.
January 9th, 1945. The Philippines. The American invasion of Luzon required the largest naval bombardment since D-Day. Over 160 ships assembled in Lingayen Gulf to support the landing of 4 Army divisions. Among them were 3 Iowa-class battleships: Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri. Their mission? Provide fire support for the beach assault, destroy any Japanese surface forces that attempted to interfere. Japanese commanders knew the invasion was coming. They had assembled a desperate defense force: destroyers, cruisers, the remnants of their once mighty combined fleet. Their plan was audacious. Wait until American ships committed to the beach bombardment, then strike from the north with everything they had remaining. The attack came at dawn on January 12th.
American radar detected the assault force at 53 miles, approaching at high speed from the direction of Formosa. 2 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, numerous smaller escorts. Their orders were simple: close to torpedo range, inflict maximum damage on the American invasion fleet. On Iowa's bridge, Captain Lee studied the contacts, made a decision that would define the battle. He ordered all 3 Iowa-class battleships to break from the bombardment group, move to intercept, engage the Japanese at maximum range, destroy them before they could threaten the invasion fleet. The Japanese commander, Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima, watched his radar as the American battleships turned toward him. He calculated distances. At their current closing speed, his force would enter torpedo range in approximately 45 minutes. If they could survive that long, they could still accomplish their mission. He did not understand that 45 minutes was a lifetime when facing American long-range guns.
Iowa, open fire at 06, 17 hours. Range, 26.4 miles. The longest-range naval engagement in Pacific history. 9 16-inch shells scream into the sky. Rising so high, they briefly catch the sunlight that has not yet reached the ocean surface, glowing like meteors against the purple darkness. 93 seconds of flight time. Impact. The heavy cruiser Ashigara shudders. A 16-inch shell strikes her forward deck. The explosion tears through the bridge, kills the captain and most of his senior staff instantly. A second shell penetrates the engine room. Ashigara begins to slow. Smoke pours from wounds she cannot survive. Shima watches in horror. His flagship is dying. The Americans are still invisible beyond the horizon. New Jersey and Missouri add their fire. The ocean erupts with geysers as salvos walk across the Japanese formation. Shells fall like rain. Each one carries more explosive power than anything in the Japanese arsenal. The destroyer Kasumi dies next. 3 shells bracket her. One strikes directly amidships. The ship breaks in half, sinks in less than 2 minutes. 93 sailors go into the water. Only 12 will be rescued. Shima orders evasive action. His remaining ships scatter, zigzagging desperately to throw off American targeting. But Iowa's Mark 8 radar tracks every maneuver. The Mark 1A computer recalculates firing solutions in seconds. The shells keep coming. The second heavy cruiser, Nachi, takes 6 hits in 12 minutes. Her forward turrets blown off their mountings, her stern on fire. Her captain, bleeding from shrapnel wounds, orders abandon ship at 0641 hours. The remaining destroyers flee,
Two are damaged by near misses. One takes a direct hit to her torpedo tubes, detonating the weapons she had hoped to use against the invasion fleet. She limps away at 8 knots, leaving a trail of oil and wreckage. By 0700 hours, it is over. 4 Japanese ships sunk, 3 damaged.
The attack force that had hoped to devastate the American invasion was instead devastated by an enemy firing from beyond sight, beyond sound, beyond anything they had prepared for. Total American casualties in the engagement? 0. Harold Jeff emerges from turret 2 into the morning light as the guns fall silent. The barrel he had helped load dozens of times is glowing with heat. The gun captain, Marcus Webb, puts it simply. "We killed them before they even got close. Every single one." Vice Admiral Shima is pulled from the water after Nachi finally sinks. He would later tell his interrogators that the battle felt like fighting gods. "We could not see them. We could not reach them. We could only die." Tintuk Veching Tannai Lamyan. News from Lingayen Gulf spreads through the Pacific Fleet like wildfire. American commanders who had doubted radar-directed gunnery are forced to confront undeniable results. A major Japanese attack force has been annihilated at extreme range. 0 American casualties. The invasion of Luzon proceeds without significant naval interference. 4 Army divisions land on schedule. The statistical impact is staggering. Before the adoption of Lee's methods, American battleships averaged 1 confirmed kill per 18 salvos fired in surface engagements. At Lingayen Gulf, the Iowa-class ships achieve 1 confirmed kill per 4 salvos. Accuracy improvement, over 400%. Japanese surface forces effectively cease offensive operations after January 1945. The remaining ships of the combined fleet are ordered to avoid engagement with American battleships under any circumstances. Intelligence intercepts reveal that Japanese commanders have classified Iowa-class vessels as priority threats to be evaded rather than engaged. The psychological effect extends beyond the military. Japanese propaganda, which had long portrayed the Imperial Navy as invincible, falls silent on the subject of surface warfare. Newspapers that had once celebrated naval victories now focus exclusively on kamikaze attacks and homeland defense. For the American side, the victory at Lingayen Gulf becomes a symbol of technological supremacy. War correspondents write glowing accounts of the one-sided battle. Newsreels show footage of Iowa's guns firing. The American public learns that their battleships can strike enemies from distances that defy imagination. Captain Lee receives the Navy Cross for his role in developing and implementing radar-directed gunnery. The citation praises his vision and persistence in the face of institutional resistance. Admiral Nimitz personally pins the medal on Lee's chest during a ceremony broadcast across American radio networks. Harold Jeff and the crew of Turret 2 receive a commendation for their performance at Lingayen Gulf. For a welder from Pittsburgh who had never expected to see combat, it is validation beyond anything he had imagined. Perhaps the most significant recognition comes from an unexpected source. In February 1945, captured Japanese documents reveal that Imperial Navy Headquarters has issued a formal assessment of American battleship capabilities. The document concludes that engaging Iowa-class vessels at any range is effectively suicidal. It recommends that all remaining Japanese surface assets be preserved for a final defensive action around the home islands, rather than wasted against an enemy that cannot be defeated at sea. The Japanese have conceded control of the Pacific surface. The battle that began with a single idea, born in the mind of a captain who refused to accept that tradition was superior to innovation, reaches its climax in the waters of the Philippines. 4 Japanese ships sink beneath the waves at Lingayen Gulf. joining the dozens of others that have fallen to guns firing from beyond the horizon. But what happens to the men who made this possible? What becomes of Captain Willis Lee and his vision of precision warfare? What legacy do Harold Jeff and his fellow sailors leave behind? There is one more chapter to this story, a chapter about what happens when war ends and history begins. A chapter about recognition denied and lessons forgotten. And a chapter about how an innovation that changed everything was almost lost to time. Câu chuyện này còn một chương cuối mà ít người biết đến. Let us trace the arc of this extraordinary journey one final time. It began with Captain Willis Lee, a Kentucky farm boy who believed radar could guide shells to targets beyond the horizon. It continued with Harold Jeff, a Pittsburgh welder who loaded those shells into guns that could reach 23 miles. Together with the crew of USS Iowa, they destroyed 4 Japanese ships from a distance the enemy believed impossible. They fought their own Navy's bureaucracy. They survived a devastating friendly fire incident, and they annihilated an entire Japanese attack force at Lingayen Gulf without losing a single American life. They changed naval warfare forever. But what happened to the men who made this possible? What became of their innovations after the guns fell silent? This story has one final twist, one that nobody expected.
Bởi vì thành công đôi khi đi kèm cái giá mà lịch sử hiếm khi ghi lại.
Captain Willis Augustus Lee did not live to see the full impact of his revolution. On August 25, 1945, just 10 days after Japan announced its surrender, Lee suffered a massive heart attack aboard his flagship. He was 57 years old. The strain of years spent fighting 2 wars simultaneously, one against the Japanese, one against his own Navy's resistance to change, had taken a toll that no medal could compensate. Lee died knowing that his methods had been vindicated. He died knowing that radar-directed gunnery had become standard doctrine across the Pacific Fleet. But he never witnessed the formal Japanese surrender aboard USS Missouri. Never saw the Iowa-class battleships he championed become symbols of American naval supremacy. Never heard the historians who would eventually call him one of the most influential naval tacticians of the 20th century. His funeral was held with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Admiral Chester Nimitz delivered the eulogy personally, describing Lee as a man who understood that the future belongs to those willing to fight for it. Among the mourners stood officers who had once dismissed Lee's ideas as theoretical nonsense. They stood in silence, perhaps reflecting on how close they had come to losing a war because they refused to listen. The men who had opposed Lee fared differently in history's judgment. Admiral Theodore Chandler, who had led the resistance to radar-directed gunnery, continued his career after the war, but he never achieved the prominence he had sought. His name appears in few histories of the Pacific Campaign. When he retired in 1952, his farewell speech notably avoided any mention of the tactical revolution he had tried to prevent. But what of Harold Jeff, the welder from Pittsburgh who had loaded shells into Iowa's guns during the battles that changed everything? Jeff returned home in November 1945 to a hero's welcome that lasted exactly one afternoon. His family gathered at the train station. His mother wept. His father, a steelworker who had spent his life building the framework of American industry, shook his son's hand and said simply, "You did good, son." Then life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Jeff went back to welding. He married his high school sweetheart in 1947. He raised 3 children in a modest house on Pittsburgh's north side. He rarely spoke about the war, and when he did, he never mentioned the battles that historians would later study as turning points in naval warfare. In 1978, A graduate student researching Iowa-class battleships tracked Jeff down for an interview. The old welder, now 62 years old, sat in his backyard and described loading shells into Turret 2 with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to describe welding a steel beam. When asked if he understood at the time that he was participating in history, Jeff laughed softly. "We were just doing our jobs. The captain figured out how to hit them from far away. We just made sure the shells got where they needed to go. That's all any of us did. Our jobs." Jeff died in 1994. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette mentioned his Navy service, but included no details about the battles he had fought or the revolution he had helped create.
The fire control systems that Lee championed aboard Iowa became the foundation for every precision-guided weapons system that followed. The principles he proved in combat, that radar could direct fire with mathematical precision, that mechanical computers could solve ballistic equations faster than human minds, that technology could extend the reach of destruction beyond anything previously imagined. These principles shaped military development for the next 8 decades. During the Korean War, Iowa-class battleships provided fire support using updated versions of Lee's systems. At the Siege of Wonsan in 1951, USS Missouri fired over 2,000 rounds at enemy positions, achieving accuracy rates that would have been impossible using traditional gunnery methods. The Vietnam War saw the return of Iowa herself. Recommissioned in 1984 after decades in mothballs, she provided naval gunfire support along the coast of Lebanon and later in the Persian Gulf. The Gulf War of 1991 marked the final combat deployment of the Iowa class. USS Missouri and USS Wisconsin fired Tomahawk cruise missiles and 16-inch shells at Iraqi targets. The missiles, direct descendants of the precision guidance concepts Lee had pioneered, struck targets hundreds of miles inland with accuracy measured in meters rather than yards. When Missouri fired her last shots of the war, her crew included sailors who had never heard of Willis Lee or the battles of 1944 and 1945. But every shell they fired, every system they operated, every principle of precision warfare they employed could trace its lineage back to a captain who believed that radar could change everything. The numbers tell a story of transformation. Before Lee's innovations, American battleship gunnery achieved approximately 5% hit rates at ranges beyond 15 miles. After the adoption of radar-directed fire control, hit rates exceeded 25% at ranges beyond 20 miles. That 5-fold improvement translated directly into lives saved, battles won, wars shortened. Historians estimate that Lee's methods contributed to the destruction of over 40 Japanese surface vessels between October 1944 and August 1945. Today, every GPS-guided weapon, every smart bomb, every precision munition that strikes its target with pinpoint accuracy owes something to the men who first proved that machines could guide destruction with mathematical certainty.
Nhưng bài học lớn nhất không phải về kỹ thuật.
The most important lesson from this story is not about technology at all. It is about the courage to challenge assumptions. It is about the persistence required to fight institutional resistance. It is about the faith necessary to believe in ideas that others dismiss as impossible. Willis Lee faced opposition from every direction. Senior officers told him his methods were theoretical. Experienced gunners told him radar could never replace human judgment. Bureaucrats told him the Navy could not afford to retrain thousands of sailors on unproven techniques. He persisted anyway. He collected data. He ran experiments. He built alliances with anyone willing to listen. And when he finally got his chance to prove his theories in combat, he delivered results so overwhelming that even his critics could not deny them. This pattern, the visionary innovator fighting against institutional inertia, repeats throughout military history. Billy Mitchell argued for air power when generals still believed cavalry would decide future wars. Hyman Rickover pushed for nuclear submarines when the Navy establishment dismissed atomic propulsion as impractical. In each case, individuals with unpopular ideas faced ridicule, resistance, and career-threatening opposition before ultimately transforming their institutions. The same pattern appears in civilian life.
Every major innovation, from the personal computer to the smartphone to the electric car, faced skeptics who insisted the established ways were better. Every breakthrough required someone willing to persist through rejection, failure, and mockery. Lee's story reminds us that progress is never automatic. It requires people willing to fight for it.
Và có một chi tiết cuối cùng mà hầu hết mọi người không biết.
In 2018, the National Archives declassified a collection of documents related to Pacific naval operations during World War II. Among the thousands of pages was a folder labeled simply Long Range Gunnery Assessment, 1945. Inside was a memorandum written by a Japanese naval intelligence officer in the final weeks of the war. The document, translated and annotated by American analysts, contained a remarkable admission. The officer had been tasked with understanding how American battleships had achieved such devastating accuracy at extreme ranges. He had interviewed survivors of Lingayen Gulf and other engagements. He had studied captured equipment and analyzed shell fragment patterns. And he had reached a conclusion that his superiors refused to accept. The Americans, he wrote, had not simply improved their technology. They had changed their entire philosophy of warfare. They had embraced the idea that machines could make decisions faster and more accurately than humans. They had integrated radar, computers, and communications into a system that functioned as a single entity rather than a collection of separate components. But the most striking passage came at the end of the memorandum. We knew the Americans had radar. We knew they had computing machines. But we believed these were tools to assist human gunners, not to replace them. We did not understand that they had built something new, something we had no answer for. By the time we realized our mistake, it was too late. The document was stamped with a date, August 14th, 1945, one day before Japan announced its surrender. The officer who wrote it was captured 2 weeks later. He spent the remainder of his life as a professor of engineering at Tokyo University. He never knew that his assessment would eventually be declassified and read by historians seeking to understand why Japan lost the Pacific War. But his words captured something essential about Lee's revolution. It was not simply about better guns or more powerful computers. It was about a fundamentally different way of thinking about warfare, a way that the Japanese, for all their tactical brilliance, had never imagined. From a Kentucky farm boy with an idea that admirals called impossible, to a Pittsburgh welder who loaded shells he barely understood, to 4 Japanese warships destroyed at 23 miles, to an entire enemy fleet forced to abandon offensive operations, to a legacy of precision warfare that continues to this day. Willis Lee and the men who served under him demonstrated that innovation, persistence, and courage can overcome any obstacle, even the weight of tradition itself. The numbers speak for themselves. Over 40 enemy ships destroyed, hundreds of thousands of shells fired with unprecedented accuracy, countless American lives saved because battles were won from distances that protected our sailors from enemy fire, and a revolution in military technology that shaped the next 8 decades of warfare. That is the power of one man refusing to accept that the impossible cannot be done. If you know similar stories of innovations that changed history, share them in the comments below. World War II produced hundreds of breakthroughs that began as ideas dismissed as crazy, impractical, or forbidden. This is just one of them. Subscribe to discover more untold stories from history. Stories about ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things. About ideas that seemed insane until they changed the world. About the moments when courage and innovation intersected to alter the course of human events. Because here is the truth that Willis Lee understood, that Harold Jeff demonstrated, that the crew of USS Iowa proved beyond any doubt. The horizon is not a limit, it is an invitation. And those who accept that invitation are the ones who change everything.